This episode contains detailed descriptions of graphic violence, mass casualties, and extremist ideology. Listener discretion is strongly advised. April 23rd, 2018. A warm spring afternoon on Yonge Street in Toronto. Shoppers, students, office workers, thousands of people filling the sidewalks. In seconds, a white rental van jumped the curb. Bodies were thrown into the air. Chaos erupted. By the time it was over, 11 people were dead and 15 injured. The deadliest intentional attack in modern Canadian history. The van began its deadly path just after 1:27 p.m., turning southbound onto Yonge Street from Finch Avenue. Behind the wheel, 25-year-old Alek Minassian. He had rented the Ryder van only hours earlier. The first pedestrians struck were near Olive Avenue. Witnesses said there was no hesitation, no attempt to brake. The van jumped the curb at speed, hitting people head-on. At first, some thought it was a traffic accident, but as the van swerved back onto the sidewalk, once, twice, 3 times, it became clear this was deliberate. Eyewitnesses described a scene of chaos. One man told the Globe and Mail, "It was like a war zone. I saw bodies everywhere." Another said he saw a woman's body thrown against a bus shelter, then crumple onto the pavement. Shoes and bags were left scattered across the sidewalk. Cell phones buzzed unanswered. A stroller was knocked onto its side. Clothing and shattered glass marked the van's trail. The victims were ordinary people. A 22-year-old university student on her way to class. An 80-year-old grandmother walking home from the market. Office workers out for lunch. Newcomers to Canada exploring the neighborhood. Seniors enjoying the sun. Their lives ended in an instant. As the van accelerated south, it mounted the sidewalk again near North York Civic Center. Witnesses screamed for others to get out of the way. Some ran into shops or hid behind bus shelters. Others froze, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. Some bystanders ran toward the injured. Strangers took off jackets and scarves to use as bandages. Others dropped to their knees on bloodied sidewalks performing CPR. One man later told reporters, "I didn't know her name, but I couldn't let her die alone." By 1:32 p.m., 911 operators were overwhelmed with calls. Reports described multiple pedestrians struck, dozens injured, and chaos spreading along Yonge. Police and paramedics raced to the scene, not yet knowing what they were responding to. The van continued south for nearly 2 kilometers, weaving between intersections and sidewalks. Traffic screeched to a halt. Pedestrians scattered in every direction. For nearly 25 minutes, Toronto's busiest street became a corridor of terror. Finally, near Shepherd Avenue, the van came to a stop. Minassian stepped out, holding an object in his hand. He pointed it at Constable Ken Lam, shouting, "Shoot me in the head!" Witnesses braced for gunfire, but Lam kept calm. He lowered his voice. He turned off his siren. He gave clear, firm commands. After long seconds, Minassian dropped to the ground. He was handcuffed and taken into custody. The rampage was over. But in the space of 25 minutes, 11 people were dead and 15 others were injured. It was the deadliest intentional attack in modern Canadian history. So who was Alek Minassian? Born in 1992, he grew up in Richmond Hill, Ontario, in a modest suburban home with his parents and his younger brother. On the surface, he was a quiet kid, shy, withdrawn, more comfortable with computers than with people. At Seneca College, he studied computer programming, but even there, he stood out. Classmates later described him as socially awkward. He often muttered to himself, avoided eye contact, and had strange mannerisms. He would pace hallways, sometimes rocking back and forth, or suddenly blurting out words that seemed disconnected from the conversation. Some who knew him believed he was harmless, just an odd student keeping to himself. Others admitted they felt unsettled in his presence. One classmate later recalled that he was the kind of guy who could explode one day, but you never knew when. Minassian was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and struggled to connect socially. Though intelligent, he found little success with friendships, dating, or fitting into groups. That isolation grew heavier as he moved through his 20s. In 2017, Minassian tried to reinvent himself. He enlisted in the Canadian Armed Forces, hoping perhaps that military life would give him structure, belonging, even purpose. But it lasted just 16 days. Instructors reported that he was unable to adapt, physically and socially. He left basic training defeated. Another failure, another rejection. Online, Minassian found an escape and a community. Not a healthy one, not a supportive one. He found the incel movement, involuntary celibates, a toxic online subculture filled with anger, misogyny, and resentment toward women. Incel forums are echo chambers, places where bitterness is reinforced and where violent fantasies are encouraged. In these digital spaces, women are blamed for men's failures. Attractive men are mocked as Chads. Women are degraded as Stacys. And men like Minassian, socially isolated, frustrated, and angry, are told they are victims of an unfair world. But the rhetoric doesn't stop at complaint. It glorifies revenge. It elevates killers. The most infamous of them was Elliot Rodger, who murdered 6 people in California in 2014 before killing himself. In the incel world, Rodger became a martyr. They called him the Supreme Gentleman. Minassian idolized Rodger. He read his manifesto. He watched his videos. He believed that he too could strike back, that he could carve his name into this hateful movement. On the morning of April 23, 2018, just minutes before driving onto Yonge Street, Minassian posted a chilling message on Facebook. The incel rebellion has already begun. We will overthrow all the Chads and Stacys. All hail the Supreme Gentleman Elliot Rodger. This was no accident. The van was his weapon. The sidewalk, his stage. He wanted the world to notice. He wanted recognition, not as an awkward, forgotten man, but as a soldier in a hateful cause. When Minassian was asked by a detective about how he felt about those who died or were hurt in the van attack, he gave a chilling statement. I feel like I accomplished my mission. After his arrest, Alek Minassian was taken into custody. What followed was hours of interrogation, a video later released to the public. Sitting calmly across from detectives, Minassian spoke without hesitation. He explained why he had chosen a van, easy to rent, powerful enough to kill, and simple to operate. He described scouting Yonge Street in the days before the attack, noting how wide the sidewalks were and how crowded they would be on a warm, sunny afternoon. He told investigators that his goal was to kill as many people as possible, to spark what he called an incel rebellion. When detectives asked if he understood the devastation, he said plainly, "Mission accomplished." This flat, emotionless confession shocked the country. There was no remorse, no struggle, no confusion. Minassian framed his actions as deliberate, even strategic. But for families of the victims, justice would be slow. The trial was originally scheduled for early 2020. It was delayed multiple times. Defense motions, scheduling conflicts, and finally the COVID-19 pandemic, which shut down Ontario courts for months. Each delay added to the grief and frustration of survivors waiting for closure. When the trial finally began, the defense focused on one argument, that Minassian was not criminally responsible because of his autism spectrum disorder. His lawyer claimed his condition impaired his ability to make moral choices, that his actions were driven by neurological compulsion, not intent. The prosecution pushed back hard. They argued the evidence showed meticulous planning. Minassian had researched van rentals, selected Yonge Street, chosen a time when pedestrians would be most vulnerable. He had written online about his desire to inspire others. This was not compulsion, they argued. It was calculation. The trial itself was unique. Because of pandemic restrictions, it was held mostly online, with Justice Anne Malloy presiding by video. Families of victims watched the proceedings virtually, adding another layer of distance to an already painful process. In March of 2021, Justice Malloy delivered her verdict. Alek Minassian was guilty on all counts, 11 murders, 15 attempted murders. She rejected the defense's argument outright, ruling that autism did not explain or excuse his crimes. Minassian, she said, knew exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it. Her decision brought some relief, but no true comfort. For the families, nothing could undo the years of waiting or the lives that had been lost. The verdict meant accountability, but not healing. Minassian was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 25 years, the maximum penalty under Canadian law. For a man who had sought infamy, the judge denied him it, in her closing words, refusing even to say his name in her verdict. Toronto grieved in the days that followed. On Yonge Street, makeshift memorials appeared almost instantly. Flowers, candles, handwritten notes, and photographs lined the sidewalks where lives had been taken. Messages read, "We are Toronto strong," and "You will not be forgotten." The scene of horror became a place of mourning. At Mel Lastman Square, just steps from where the van came to a stop, thousands gathered for a vigil. Families, friends, survivors, and strangers stood together in silence. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Premier Kathleen Wynne, and Mayor John Tory joined faith leaders and community representatives. But it was the families of victims whose words carried the most weight. Their grief and love filled the square. 11 innocent people never came home that day. Anne-Marie D'Amico, 30, a project coordinator at Invesco, remembered for her humanitarian work and her kindness. So-hee Chung, 22, a South Korean student at the University of Toronto, dedicated to her studies and loved by her peers. Chul-min Eddie Kang, 45, a chef remembered for his generosity, laughter, and friendship. Dorothy Sewell, 80, a great-grandmother and lifelong Blue Jays fan, fiercely proud of her family. Geraldine Brady, 83, known for her independence and her love of her North York community. Butis Renuka Amarasinghe, 45, a single mother, devoted to her young son and active in Toronto's Sri Lankan community. Munir Abdo Najjar, 85, visiting from Jordan with his wife, reunited with family in Canada when tragedy struck. Mary Elizabeth Betty Forsyth, 94, a lifelong Torontonian, remembered by neighbors for her daily walks and her kindness. Ji-hoon Kim, 22, a student from South Korea, described as bright, ambitious, and deeply loved by his family. Jongjin Andy Kim, 38, a father of 3 who had recently immigrated to Canada, working hard to give his family a better life. Solim Sammy Yoon, 28, a young professional remembered for his adventurous spirit, love of music, and close friendships. Each name carried a story. Each life represented dreams interrupted and families broken apart. Survivors carried scars that could not always be seen. Some lived with permanent physical injuries, broken bones, head trauma, mobility challenges. Others lived with invisible wounds, flashbacks, nightmares, the trauma of watching strangers die before their eyes. For many, every siren, every crowded sidewalk was a reminder of that day. Yet alongside grief came resilience. Ordinary people had rushed to help amid chaos, kneeling on bloodied sidewalks to perform CPR, refusing to let victims die alone. Paramedics and firefighters fought to save lives in conditions described as overwhelming. And Constable Ken Lam's decision to end the standoff without firing his weapon was hailed worldwide as an act of courage and restraint. Globally, Toronto's tragedy was compared to vehicle ramming attacks in Nice, Berlin, London, and Barcelona. But this attack was different. It was not driven by jihadist extremism or nationalist ideology. Instead, it was rooted in misogyny and online radicalization, the spread of hatred from anonymous forums into real-world violence. The attack forced Canadians to confront difficult questions. How do we police online spaces without infringing on freedoms? How do we detect radicalization when it festers in isolation? And how do we support victims and families long after the headlines fade? For Toronto, April 23, 2018 became a date etched into memory. Each year since, vigils have been held. Families and survivors gather at Mel Lastman Square to remember. The city pauses, not only to grieve, but to reflect on the resilience shown in the aftermath. The Yonge Street van attack scarred Toronto, but it also revealed something else: the compassion of strangers, the courage of first responders, and the strength of a city that refused to be defined by hate. In just 25 minutes, Yonge Street was transformed from an ordinary Toronto sidewalk into a place of horror. 11 lives lost, 15 more forever changed, families shattered, a city scarred. But what endures is not the name of the man who caused the pain. It's the courage of strangers who rushed to help, the compassion of a city that stood together, and the restraint of an officer who showed calm in the face of chaos. The Yonge Street van attack was an act of hate, but Toronto refused to be defined by hate. What endures is resilience, compassion, and strength. I'm Mark, welcome back, and thank you for listening to our podcast.
And I'm Leah. Thank you for coming back. And to all our new subscribers on YouTube who are listening to our podcast and watching our true crime shorts.
It means a lot to us to have you joining us for another episode of Northern Dark.
The cases we cover are heavy, and it means a lot that you take the time to listen, reflect, and be part of this conversation with us.
Now that we've shared the details, let's talk about what this case means for Toronto, for Canada, and for all of us.
What makes this case so chilling is that it wasn't tied to an international terror group or political ideology. It was homegrown, a young man radicalized in the darkest corners of the internet.
Exactly. Alek Minassian was part of the so-called incel movement, a community built on misogyny, resentment, and violence towards women. It's easy to dismiss that as fringe, but the internet gives fringe ideas reach.
And it unfortunately gives them a perceived power. These online spaces normalize hate, and in Minassian's case, they inspired real-world violence. It forces us to ask, how do we stop this before it happens again?
Do tech companies need to take more responsibility for shutting down these forums? Should law enforcement monitor them more closely? People are worried about government overreach, but even freedom of speech doesn't give you the right to just shout out fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire. If people get hurt, trampled over, you will be held accountable.
But then we face a very Canadian dilemma. How do we balance free speech with prevention? At what point does online anger cross the line into danger?
There are no easy answers, but what's clear is that online words can lead to offline bloodshed, and a debate in Parliament is needed to address these issues. Ignoring them won't make it go away or fix things.
And then there's Constable Ken Lam. He ended the standoff without firing a single shot. That moment showed restraint, calm, and humanity when the world expected violence.
That's right. And it stood out globally. Around the world, people were sharing the video of Lam calmly talking down a man who had just murdered 11 people. In many other countries, that confrontation would have ended in a hail of bullets.
It really made people think about the Canadian approach to policing. For once, the story wasn't about excessive force. It was about restraint. And that's a rare narrative these days.
Still, for the families of the victims, no amount of praise for police, no verdict, no sentence can erase what happened. For them, April 23rd will never be history. It will always be personal memory.
And the delays in the trial, 3 years before a verdict, only stretched out the pain. Families had to keep reliving the attack in courtrooms and media coverage without real closure.
Exactly. And when the verdict finally came, guilty on all counts, there was relief, but no celebration. Justice can't bring back a loved one. It can only acknowledge the loss.
And yet, Toronto also showed resilience. The vigils at Mel Lastman Square, the flowers along Yonge Street, the phrase, "Toronto strong," written everywhere. Those moments reminded us that hate didn't win.
Two paths defined that day, one of destruction and one of restraint. One man chose violence, but so many others, first responders, bystanders, even Constable Lam, chose compassion, courage, and humanity.
And that's why this case matters. It's not just about one man's hate. It's about how a city and a country responds to it.
So, we want to hear from you. What do you think Canada should be doing to confront online radicalization before it becomes real-world tragedy? Go to our X account and post a comment.
How do we keep our communities safe while protecting free expression? And what lessons should we carry forward from this day?
These are hard questions, but they're conversations we need to have.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Northern Dark True Canadian Crime. If you'd like to continue the conversation, follow us on social media. We're on X at Northern Dark TCC, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for full episodes and shorts.
See you next Monday. Until then, take care of each other.